The sentence sliced through the air like a thin, sharp, cold blade, sharp enough to make the entire world pause for a beat. You don't look like someone who belongs in first class. Not a greeting, not a procedural check, just a cut, the first crack in a storm. The speaker herself did not understand she had provoked. Jordan Miles stood still at Gate Bravo 14 of Logan Airport. Morning light spilled through the wide glass panels, illuminating his face, and the gleaming name badge pinned to the chest of the woman who had just spoken, Emily Ward, chief flight attendant, sharply built, her smile as cold as polished stainless steel. The entire boarding area sank into a dense silence. Silence from shock. Silence from embarrassment. Silence from the quiet awareness that what just happened was no accident. Jordan said nothing. He simply tilted his head slightly, just enough to see her more clearly, just enough to imprint into his memory the way her eyes scanned him from his refined black leather shoes to his simple grey coat, to his skin, eyes searching for a reason to exclude. He handed her his boarding pass. Seat 1 Alpha. Printed clearly, unmistakable. Emily held the ticket as if it were an odd object requiring inspection due to suspicion. She narrowed her eyes, turning the paper, as though hoping it would confess to an invisible flaw, probably a system error. She said sweetly, her voice honey mixed with poison. Seat 1 Alpha is usually reserved for priority guests. Behind Jordan, someone stepped up lightly but confidently. Colton Reeves, 48 years old, a white businessman in an expensive suit, walked forward as if strolling a red carpet. No one checked his ticket. No one asked him anything. A glass of champagne even appeared in his hand before he made it past the line. Two worlds, two standards in the exact same place. The hook sank deep. The contrast was so stark and bare it needed no explanation. Jordan glanced at Colton once, just once. A look light enough to avoid confrontation, but deep enough that any camera, if one existed, would catch the quiet sensation of being dismissed without being allowed to react. Emily looked at Jordan again. A smile, the kind worn by someone who believes their tiny authority is an unwritten law. You can head to the back, seat at 23 or something. No question, no apology, just an order. Jordan did not argue. He did not need to, because he knew this was never a story about a seat. It was a story about a system convinced it had the right to push him aside without consequence. He stepped into the cabin quietly. The airplane door swallowed him like a cinematic transition, silent yet filled with undercurrents. The aircraft hummed softly as Jordan walked toward row 23. Rolling luggage, clicking seat belts, cheap commercial background music, all sounds blending together, but beneath them was a pulse, the pulse of a storm forming. Jordan sat in seat 23 Alpha, back straight. He inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, and measured like someone keeping a fire under control in his chest. This was not the first time, and likely not the last, but today he was not tired. Today he was not silent out of resignation. Today he was preparing to strike back in his own way. He unlocked his phone. One touch. The tracelog icon appeared black and opaque, fully encrypted. The app was his creation, built for corporations, transport companies, hotels, airports, a covert system that logged every injustice in real-time images, data timestamps, internal network routing, staff identification codes. A silent eye. No one knew. No one saw. No one could erase it. He activated it. The front camera opened, not filming faces, Not the cabin, only the boarding pass, the seat number, the surroundings, the things that cannot lie. A woman seated across the aisle leaned slightly to look. Her eyes narrowed. "He is too calm," she whispered. "That's not good." Jordan heard her, but his gaze remained fixed on the window. The plane was preparing to push back. Cold grey sky. A perfect day for a system to expose itself. He locked the screen and placed the phone in the seat pocket. The app continued recording. It needed nothing from him. In first class, Colton raised his champagne like lifting an invisible badge of social privilege. In the back, Jordan intertwined his fingers, silent, but not weak. He did not know, or perhaps knew very well, that every passing second pushed everything closer to the moment the game would flip. The cabin trembled faintly, not because of the plane, but because something was shifting between the rows. Jordan leaned back, closed his eyes. 1 beat. 2 beats. Sometimes power is not in standing up to argue. Power is in letting truth flow on its own, unhurried, unforced. The cabin lights dimmed. People quieted. No one knew what was coming. Only one man did. Jordan opened his eyes. In his gaze there was something unusual. Not anger, not hurt, but certainty. Certainty that this moment, this mistake in judgment would not become a sad memory. It would become a precedent, a lesson, an earthquake. And somewhere above the cabin, in Aero West Airlines operations room, a small monitor was about to blink its first alert, like a doorway cracking open toward consequences every one of them would soon face. Because they had not simply pushed aside the wrong man. They were about to collide with the wrong system, the wrong power, the wrong era. And Jordan Miles, silent, steady, and ruthless in the name of justice, would be the one holding the key that blows everything wide open. The cabin still trembled lightly, but beneath the metallic sounds and the preparations for takeoff, another rhythm was growing, the rhythm of truth, advancing toward those who believed they could bend it. In row 23, Jordan opened his eyes, just as the cabin fell into an unusual hush. No one knew why people had lowered their voices. The air carried something difficult to explain, an invisible wire pulled tight between the front and the back, between manufactured power and genuine dignity. Only Jordan understood clearly that when a system builds injustice, it always reveals its own cracks. 3 rows ahead, Phoebe Grant was ready. She had no intention of working on this flight, but what she had witnessed at the boarding gate kept replaying in her mind like a scene stuck in a loop. Not because it was rare, the opposite, because it was so familiar, it sent a chill down her spine. She unlocked her phone, tapped once the camera opened. No words, no hashtags, no moral commentary, just evidence. The lens aimed toward Jordan sitting upright, silent, his gaze fixed on the window, as if the sky itself was mirroring his state of mind. A woman a row ahead whispered, "Something is about to happen." And at that exact moment in the first-class cabin, the situation began to shift. Emily Ward was pouring more champagne for Colton Reeves when she noticed the look in the eyes of Hannah Rivers, the young flight attendant. Hannah said nothing, but the way she glanced at the digital roster in her hand, clearly displaying Seat 1, Alpha assigned to Jordan. Miles told Emily the girl had realized something was wrong. Emily frowned a small crease, but enough to turn the incident into a secret that must not be exposed. "Do not worry about it," Emily said quietly, her tone clipped and cold. But Hannah could not ignore it. She looked at Colton, lounging comfortably, the champagne glass glinting under the cabin lights. He knew he was not the rightful occupant of that seat. Yet he sat there with no hint of guilt, as if taking what was not his was a privilege inherited like an heirloom. Hannah inhaled, then again. Only when she finally steadied herself did she realize her hands were trembling. 3 floors above, inside the Aero West Airlines operations room, a cold space full of screens marked with lines of red and green like electrical circuits, Robert Lane noticed a strange alert. A small box blinking on the screen, a cabin feed from a security camera, a data file tagged Incident Log Seat Reassignment Review Required. He enlarged it, replayed it. There was no audio, but body language spoke louder than any voice. Emily stopping when scanning the boarding pass. The second she frowned. The moment Jordan was pushed down to row 23. The moment champagne was handed to Colton without any verification. Robert leaned back in his chair. "Good heavens," he whispered, not out of surprise, but because he knew this type of incident was not only wrong, but dangerous, especially when the system data indicated the passenger named Jordan Miles was a national-level member involved in multiple technology projects linked to the government. Robert did not hesitate. He forwarded the entire clip to the captain, marked with urgent regulation. Breach requires action before takeoff. In the cockpit, Captain Dana Holloway received the alert. She set a pen down, reviewed the video 3 times, missed not a single second. Her eyes, calm yet sharp as metal, moved from the screen to the cabin door. Outside, her crew was performing their duties, but inside the footage there was a truth too clear to deny. A chief flight attendant had abused authority, bent the rules, and done something no airline could ever accept. Dana activated the intercom, her voice deep, steady, and cold. Emily Ward report to the cockpit. Now, in the cabin, Emily heard the call. Something flickered across her eyes. Worry, unease, perhaps. But she smothered it with a stiff smile. She entered the cockpit and closed the door like someone trying to hide a mistake. Dana did not smile, did not nod, did not exchange pleasantries. She turned the screen and replayed the moment Jordan was refused his seat. "Explain?" Dana said, her gaze locked on Emily. Emily swallowed. There was a VIP who needed that seat. I just did not want to delay. Which VIP? Dana's voice tightened. And since when does the cabin crew have the authority to reassign seats without legitimate reason against the manifest, against federal regulations? Emily faltered. The air in the cockpit thickened like lead. Dana delivered the final blow with a single irrefutable sentence. There is no reason. There is only a choice. And your choice was wrong. Then, for the first time during pre-takeoff procedures, the captain left the cockpit, not for a technical issue but for ethics and discipline. When Dana stepped into the aisle, the entire cabin was pulled into a vacuum of silence. Hannah watched her. Phoebe raised her phone, ready to record. Colton looked up, trying to appear composed. Dana walked toward row 23. Her footsteps against the noise-dampening floor thudded like drums building toward a crescendo. Jordan opened his eyes. No fear, no confusion, only a strange calm, as if he had known from the beginning this moment would come. "Mr. Miles," Dana said, her voice neither raised nor softened. "Your seat is ready. I am taking you back to 1 Alpha." That was all. 1 sentence. But the entire cabin jolted. Phoebe hit record. The older woman gasped. Hannah tightened her grip, but allowed herself a small smile. Colton froze. Emily shrank against the edge of the aisle, her face drained of color. Jordan stood. Not triumphant, not grateful, simply restoring truth to where it belonged. He followed the captain walking between the rows through a silence so resonant it felt like witnessing justice take physical form. The whole cabin watched, as if watching justice walk past them. Jordan sat down in seat 1 Alpha. The captain nodded, then returned to the cockpit. But that moment, the moment seat 1 Alpha returned to its rightful owner, was the first flash of the media storm gathering on the ground. Because when Phoebe pressed post, the second video ignited. And from here, everything could only move in one direction, larger, stronger, and rapidly beyond anything an airline could control. Jordan remained still, hands interlocked, expression unchanged. But behind that calm, an entire system was about to collide with a wall of truth it had built for itself. The tremor spread through the cabin like a quiet but razor-sharp wave, pulling every gaze toward the front, where Jordan had just taken his seat in 1 Alpha. It was not the silence of a flight preparing for takeoff. It was the silence of a system stumbling into its own trap. The other passengers tried to pretend they were not staring, but their eyes clung to his back like metal drawn to a magnet. Hannah stood at the end of the first-class cabin, both hands holding a tray of hot towels, forgetting to take another step. She had seen the shift the moment the captain intervened. The truth surfaced so quickly it made her shiver. She knew this was not a personal error. It was a symptom of an illness left unnamed for far too long. Emily walked past Hannah, her expression stiff, as she attempted to rebuild the authority she once wielded, but her eyes could no longer hide the fear. Not fear of Jordan, but fear of the consequences the entire industry had always tried to outrun. In the rows behind, Phoebe reviewed the video she had just recorded. Her eyes widened as she watched the view count and the shares surge with every passing second. Ordinary videos did not spread this fast. Only moments that tapped into collective pain, into long-buried outrage, spread like fire meeting wind. And she knew, with the instinct of a seasoned journalist, that this was no longer the story of a single passenger. It was the story of a nation exhausted by mistakes, sugar-coated with professional smiles. Jordan did not look at his phone. He did not need to. He could feel the shift around him, the air in first class, tightening, growing heavier, yet somehow more honest. Honest in the way truth feels when it is dragged out of the dark. He placed his hands on the armrests, relaxed his shoulders, and closed his eyes for a moment. Not to rest, but to settle into the safest form of equilibrium, the one that comes when a person knows they are exactly where they are meant to be at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right role. The first-class door clicked open softly. Robert Lane was calling down from the operations room. A red signal appeared on the captain's control panel. Dana took the call with a low, crisp tone and listened with unwavering focus. No one in the cabin knew what was being said, but they could see her response clearly. Not surprise, not anger. Only the resolve of someone who had just received data that confirmed every suspicion she had. In the rear cabin, a young passenger whispered, "Who is he?" The friend beside him answered quickly, "Definitely not a regular person. No one just gets escorted to first class by the captain." The whisper spread row by row like a leaking current. Someone managed to refresh their mobile network one last time before the plane lost signal. A post appeared on their screen. Jordan Miles, CEO of Miles Tech, the man behind multiple national data security systems. The passenger's jaw dropped. Good heavens, they really picked the wrong person. In first class, Colton Reeves shrank into his new seat, the luxury he once wore like a second skin, now feeling unbearably tight. He could no longer wave his hands or boast about dinner with some senator. Those stories suddenly felt ridiculous when placed beside the image of a captain correcting a wrong done to a man he had casually dismissed. Every glance in the cabin touched him like a silent accusation. He felt it, and he hated being seen that clearly. Jordan opened his eyes. He did not have to turn around to know the entire cabin was shifting emotionally. He felt it the way a person feels the wind change direction. No sound, no words, just the resonance of truth beginning to exercise its power. Captain Dana stepped out of the cockpit again this time to review the cabin with her own eyes. Not to inspect service standards, but to ensure no one else would be mistreated on the flight she commanded. Her presence was enough to press the atmosphere into a straight, disciplined line. She stopped in first class, scanned each row, then gave a subtle nod when her gaze met Jordan's for a fraction of a second. Jordan understood. And Dana understood. No words needed. Phoebe kept filming, but no longer out of curiosity. She recorded because she understood this story no longer belonged to any individual. It belonged to history, to justice, to the silence that had lasted far too long in polished spaces where discrimination always dressed itself as procedure. Jordan loosened his hands and pressed lightly against the edge of the seat. That small gesture was the marker. From this moment forward, the story was no longer about his reaction. It was about society's reaction, because everyone knows one truth: when a system exposes its own wrongdoing, nothing can stop the truth from advancing. The cabin felt too small for what was about to unfold. The weight of an unspoken conversation hung above every passenger. Someone glanced out the window, then back at Jordan. A man calm as still water, yet beneath the surface, an earthquake was preparing to ripple across thousands of kilometers. No one knew that another video, only seconds away from being posted, would become the spark forcing the entire aviation industry to stand before the public, not with an apology, but with a moral reckoning. And Jordan sat still, as if he were the one holding the scalpel, and the system had just placed itself on the operating table. Jordan remained still in Seat 1 Alpha, but that silence was no longer the silence of someone forced into submission. It was the silence of someone holding the upper ground, the silence of an epicenter, shifting the entire axis of the cabin. Those around him could not look away, even as they pretended to stare out the window or bury themselves in a magazine. Truth has its own gravity, and in this moment, the entire aircraft was being pulled into its orbit. In row 26, Phoebe's phone screen lit up, glowing with rapidly increasing notifications. The first video, the moment Jordan was pushed to the back of the plane, had already reached hundreds of thousands of views within minutes. But it was the second video, the moment the captain personally escorted him back to 1 Alpha, that was exploding. The numbers were mutating, jumping in huge leaps, as if the internet were devouring the story with ravenous hunger. A comment flashed. "What is happening?" A black man kicked out of first class and the captain had to step in. "What's his name?" "Right beneath it." "Oh, that's Jordan Miles, CEO of Miles Tech, the guy behind Tracelog. They picked the wrong man." And another, "This isn't an error. This is discrimination." Phoebe tilted her head, eyes widening. She understood she had activated a chain reaction, something no one in this aircraft could yet grasp, fully, except Jordan. In the rear cabin, whispers crackled along the rows like sparks running across wires. He is really a CEO. If the captain personally fixed it, Something must be huge. That flight attendant is done for. A man in row 29 leaned back and muttered, "I've seen him on tech news. That man isn't ordinary." Just a few whispered sentences were enough to shape a new truth. Jordan Miles was no longer the passenger who didn't look like he belonged in first class. He was now the center of a conversation about rights, dignity, and truth happening mid-air. Emily stood pressed against the cabin wall, her hands clasped together so tightly her nails dug into her skin. She looked around, but found nowhere to hide. Even her breaths felt thin, as if the air itself were judging her. She knew she was wrong. But what terrified her more was knowing her mistake was no longer internal, no longer something that could be handled quietly. It had been thrown into the public eye faster than the aircraft could roll. Hannah stood a step away, saw the tremble in Emily's eyes, and turned away. Not from pity, but because she was no longer willing to stay silent as she had minutes ago. She knew Jordan had seen her, and she knew she would have to choose stand with the truth or let silence consume her the way it had crushed so many young employees before her. In the cockpit, Captain Dana Holloway was speaking with Operations Director Robert through a secure channel. The air inside was dense, heavy like the moment before a storm. "This will not stop here," Robert said through the monitor. "Tracelog has already activated and logged the entire incident, and we already have at least 2 videos spreading at an abnormal rate." Dana nodded slowly. "Then we handle this as a safety issue, not a customer service issue," she said. "We will not let this escalate in the wrong direction." "Do you know who he is?" Robert asked. "Yes," Dana replied, her eyes fixed toward first class. "And for that exact reason, I will not allow my crew to display such ethical failure. Not a threat. A mission statement." Hannah moved down the first-class aisle with the hot towels, every step measured. As she neared Jordan, she paused for a beat. She did not speak or explain. She simply tilted her head slightly, a silent acknowledgement that she knew what had happened, and she knew it was wrong. Jordan looked at her, his eyes carrying no blame, only a deep steadiness, the steadiness of someone who had stood in the storm countless times before. Hannah understood in that moment that Jordan was not just a wronged passenger. He was someone who had seen and overcome situations like this far more often than anyone on this plane could imagine. She placed the towel on his tray table, her hand trembling slightly, but her voice firm. "If you need anything, I'm here." Jordan gave a small nod, a nod that made the silence around them grow even heavier. In the back rows, Phoebe scrolled through new comments under the latest video. Some viewers recognized Captain Dana Holloway, known in the industry for her uncompromising stance on discipline and ethics. Others were already discussing whether the airline would have to release a public statement that very day. A young passenger lowered his phone and whispered to his friend, "If this hits official news outlets, this airline is in serious trouble." "Not just the airline," his friend replied. "The whole industry." Colton Reeves gripped his champagne glass so hard he nearly warped its rim. He avoided looking at Jordan, but the pressure of dozens of eyes burning into his back was impossible to ignore. His false sense of power, the kind built on appearance, skin color, and blind self-confidence, was dissolving so quickly he did not realize when it had vanished. He tugged at his tie, trying to reclaim his polished composure. But his collar stayed tight and the air around him stayed cold. His version of power did not belong in this story anymore. Jordan now held the center, not through arrogance, but through a silence heavier than any justification. Colton understood it, and he hated it. Jordan rotated his wrist slightly as his smartwatch vibrated, signaling dozens of incoming messages. He did not check them. He did not need to. The eyes around him told him everything. This event had already grown beyond the cabin, beyond the aircraft, beyond the intentions of those who thought they could abuse authority unnoticed. He placed his hand on the armrest and took a long breath. Every muscle relaxed, yet inside him, the feeling remained sharp as a blade because he knew what was coming next. Not an explosion, not anger, but a shift far larger. A shift in the system itself. The airplane began to roll, and in that moment, as the wheels touched the taxiway, everyone in first class felt the same thing. They were not simply inside a plane. They were inside a story about to be examined, dissected, and used as proof of something millions had been saying for years. Jordan sat upright. He was not the one who created the storm. He was simply the one who refused to step aside from it. And this time, the storm would not be silenced. The aircraft continued to glide along the taxiway, but the atmosphere inside first class tightened like a room whose doors were slowly closing. No one spoke, yet the silence was filled with questions, with invisible judgment, with layers of norms peeling away right before their eyes. Jordan remained upright, gaze fixed ahead, but every sense in his body registered the shift in the awareness of those around him. Every glance that landed on him cut like a blade, not to wound, but to verify what they were witnessing. Phoebe received dozens more notifications. The second video had surpassed 1 million views in less time than she believed possible. She glanced at Jordan's face through her phone's rear camera. No anger, no confusion, no triumphant display. That expression, that cold, precise calm, not a single breath wasted, made the story even larger. A man that calm was not seeking drama, he was seeking truth, and that alone made the internet choose his side without hesitation. A top comment read, "You do not need to shout to create change. Sometimes your silence is the thing they fear most." Phoebe read it and knew it was true. Colton Reeves shifted in seat too. Charlie, but the more he adjusted, the tighter and harder the seat felt, as if shrinking under him. Not because of the seat, but because of the eyes around him. Every silent stare pressed on him like a reminder that he represented a system accustomed to hiding its errors behind privilege. Too many conversations, too many glasses of champagne, too many invisible advantages had carried him this far. But today, they had turned against him. He turned his face away, avoiding Jordan's gaze, though even that made him feel terrifyingly small. Emily stood in the galley, suddenly feeling the ground slipping out from beneath her feet. The captain had intervened in full view of the cabin without a single gesture to preserve her dignity. Emily felt the entire crew's perception of her shifting, and the worst part was not what had already happened. The worst part was the video spreading outside, beyond the aircraft, far beyond her control. A fellow flight attendant walked past, flinching slightly when their eyes met. Not hatred, not accusation, simply the reflex of someone witnessing something indefensible. Emily clenched her hands, nails digging into her palms until it burned. Hannah walked into first class, checking seats and seatbelts before takeoff. As she passed Jordan, her hands hesitated for a heartbeat. She said nothing, but her eyes held a clarity that spoke louder than words. Jordan answered with a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that he knew she had seen everything, and he knew She would not stay silent anymore. Captain Dana made her final walk through first class, not for protocol. She was assessing people. She paused briefly at the front row, looked at Jordan, then continued without a word. Only her eyes, sharp and understanding, conveyed her message she would not allow this incident to disappear into a fragmented internal report. Passengers watched her walk by, feeling the unmistakable line drawn in the air, a reminder that there were still people in this system who held on to integrity, and they were the reason it had not collapsed completely. In the row behind, a middle-aged man lifted his eyes from his book and murmured to his wife, "This is going to be on the news tonight." She replied instantly, "Not news. A shockwave." Phoebe continued filming Jordan. Nothing in his face had changed, and that made the truth even clearer. A silent man could dominate the psychological space of an entire aircraft. She felt as though she were recording a historical moment, one that would be analyzed for years through the lens of society. Jordan placed his hand on the seat pocket ahead of him, as light as a breath. That tiny motion made Phoebe's fingers tremble because she sensed what was coming. Not an outburst, but a kind of counterstrike belonging to those who understand how power truly works. Captain Dana returned to the cockpit and closed the door. A faint tremor moved through the aircraft as the engines increased thrust. But it was not the vibration that made people hold their breath. It was what they felt, that this flight was no longer a simple journey from Boston to Seattle. It was a historical turning point, a fracture line, a strike at something too familiar to be questioned until now. Jordan tilted his head, looking out the window, but his focus was not outside. It was on the core of what was happening. He knew that everything unfolding behind the scenes, the internal alerts, the cabin footage, the tracelog data was moving faster than the aircraft itself, and the truth was looking for a way out. Even without a word from him, the plane was full of voices. Voices carried in stares, voices carried in tension, voices carried in fear, spreading from the guilty to those standing near the guilt. Voices admitting that sometimes a single individual forces an entire system to confront itself. As the aircraft turned toward the runway, Jordan closed his eyes for a few seconds. Not to rest, but to feel the weight of what was approaching. A system had collided with the wrong person, and now it had to face the quietest, yet most unforgiving version of truth. No one knew what awaited at the end of this flight, but everyone knew Jordan was no longer a passenger. He had become the living indictment of a broken structure. No one noticed the hint of a smile that crossed his face. A small one. Not pride, not revenge, but acknowledgement that the moment he had long expected, the moment revealing the system's true nature, was finally here, and he had been preparing for it for a very long time. The moment the plane lifted off the ground, the entire first-class cabin sank into a taut, string-tight silence. It was not the silence of passengers settling in. It was the silence of people who knew they were sitting inside the heart of a truth that had just been uncapped, a space where every action, every glance, every word could become evidence examined under the microscope of public scrutiny. Jordan remained in the same posture, straight-backed hands lightly interlaced in front of him. He did not look around, yet he sensed everything, the shallow breaths of a few passengers, the dry swallows, the awkward shifting of seats from those trying to pretend they were uninvolved. His presence in seat 1 Alpha had forced not just one person, but the entire cabin to adjust the way they viewed the world and the way the world would now view them. In row 26, Phoebe flipped her phone downward briefly when a flight attendant walked by, but her fingers still trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the realization that she was standing at the doorway of a career-defining moment. Any journalist dreamed of a story like this, a story that required no hunting, no fabricating, no shaping, only recording because it ignited on its own like fire on dry grass. She opened the video again and saw waves of new comments rolling in every second. This airline is done. This is living proof. Any information on him, we will protect him. Can't believe this is still happening this year. Phoebe swallowed, feeling something very close to responsibility. Not responsibility to Jordan, but to the millions who would watch the video and see themselves in it. A few rows away, an older man pushed his glasses up his nose, stared at his phone and murmured, "They really pushed the wrong man." No idea how big the consequences will be. His wife replied slowly, sharply, "Depends on how honest they are when they land." In first class, Hannah straightened the tablecloth in the row ahead before stepping toward Jordan's area. She gently placed a bottle of water on his tray. Her hands trembled unconsciously, but her voice was strangely steady. "Are you all right?" A real question, not a service line. Jordan nodded, his expression calm. He could see the emotion swirling beneath her composed exterior, anger, guilt, but above all, resolve. The resolve not to stand on the side of wrongdoing, even when the wrongdoer stood next to her, even when that person was her direct superior. Hannah whispered, "I saw everything from the gate." "I should have spoken up," Jordan answered in a low, soft yet firm voice. "You did. Not with words. With your eyes." Hannah bit her lip and lowered her head. "But next time I will speak." Jordan looked directly at her. "You just did." That answer made her breath catch for a heartbeat. She stepped back, feeling her footsteps grow heavier, because she knew her life might have just shifted direction. Emily stood in the galley hands, gripping the metal counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. She heard the murmurs from the rear cabin, the sound of the restroom door opening and closing repeatedly as passengers struggled to stay still. Even the smallest noise made her flinch. But what terrified her most was not the video, not the captain, not the passengers. What she feared was the sensation that every eye was piercing through her uniform, seeing the truth she had always hidden, that bias had become a habit. She looked at her reflection in the metal cabinet door, pale, rigid, stripped of the professionalism she once took pride in. She whispered a sentence that startled even herself. "What am I doing?" But it was already too late. The moment she chose to remove Jordan from one alpha, she turned a mistake into a decision. There was no going back. In the control cabin, Captain Dana received a signal from headquarters, a blinking notification, trace log, incident syncing. That meant every data point, every frame, every second of footage had already been stored and transmitted to servers no one at Aero West could access or alter. Dana exhaled slowly and looked at her first officer. "When we land, there will be people waiting at the gate." The first officer swallowed hard. "I am guessing not regular passengers." "No," Dana replied. "The FAA, the internal board, and the media." The first officer stared at her. "Captain, this is going to be a national scandal." Dana answered with a voice free of hesitation. Then at least it must be told truthfully. Jordan opened his eyes as the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude. No one knew that inside his phone, alerts were pouring in from the Miles Tech legal team and from government partners who had been monitoring Tracelog for a long time. He looked around the cabin ahead of him, calm, quiet, still like a plaza before a storm. Jordan knew exactly what awaited when the plane landed. Not an apology, not a voucher, not an explanation, but a full dissection of the system's inner workings, one that would place him at the center of a hearing not formalized on paper, yet heavier than any legal document. A young passenger in first class leaned toward his friend. "I think we are sitting next to a historical event." The friend replied, "No, we are sitting inside it." Jordan closed his eyes gently. He did not need to prepare for what was coming. He had been preparing for it his entire life. The cabin settled into a soft glow as the overhead lights came on, yet the feeling inside everyone was as if they had stepped into a second layer of dense fog. No one spoke. No one smiled. No one dared to look comfortable. No one saw this flight as an ordinary flight anymore. They all knew they were sitting at the center of an event in which every explanation would be dissected to the bone. Jordan twisted open the bottle of water Hannah had handed him, but he did not drink. He simply placed it down his fingertips, tracing the rim as if sensing the vibration of an atmosphere pulled so tight it could be sliced by a fingernail. He stared straight ahead, not toward the door, but deeper, as if looking through the aircraft, through the clouds, into the core of what was unfolding. In row 27, Phoebe pressed her phone to her chest, not to hide it, but to listen. The notifications were firing non-stop like the heartbeat of millions following this story. The second video, the moment the captain escorted Jordan back to first class, had just been shared by a major account alongside the caption, "This is why we need technology that exposes discriminatory behavior." It was instantly reshared thousands more times. A young passenger looked at his phone and whispered, "This isn't just going viral. This is evidence." His friend replied, "Evidence of what people have been saying for years. They didn't name it. They didn't need to." It hung over the cabin like a cloud everyone had grown accustomed to ignoring. Emily stood in the galley, arms crossed not in defense, but to stop her hands from shaking. Every vibration of a phone, every creak of a seat, every movement from a passenger felt like a spotlight shining directly on her. She remembered the moment at the gate, the way she frowned, the way her voice changed, the way she said that sentence, as if it were normal, as if it had always been acceptable. She wondered how many times she had done the same thing before without anyone recording it. That truth chilled her skin. Hannah walked past the galley and glanced at Emily for a brief second. Her eyes no longer held the fear of a subordinate. They held something else, awakening disappointment and a hint of pity. Not pity for the trouble Emily was in, but pity because Emily had chosen the wrong side at a time when truth refused to stay hidden any longer. The restroom door opened. An older passenger stepped out, cast a quick look at the galley, then turned away, fast, avoiding the silent confrontation happening in the air between the two attendants. Back in first class, Jordan lifted his phone not to check social media. He opened another app, a dark interface with white text displaying streams of secure alerts, data synced to secure server. Incident analysis in progress. Personnel cross-check complete. Violation level severe. Jordan skimmed through it. No surprise, no excitement. Just confirmation of what he already knew. The truth was spreading in two directions through social media and through technical data, and this time neither could be shut down. In seat 1, Bravo. A blonde woman lowered her magazine and looked at Jordan long enough for her gaze to meet his. She said softly, "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Jordan replied simply, "I'm used to it." The word stopped her cold. No one should be used to things like this. But Jordan was, and that truth made the story heavier, larger, harder to swallow. Colton Reeves peered through the gap between the seats and accidentally met Jordan's eyes for a fraction of a second before jerking his head away. The feeling of being seen in the sense of being exposed, made him shrink into a seat that no longer fit his ego. He wanted to speak, to explain, to justify anything to soften the humiliation spreading across his face like wildfire. But he could not. Every word stuck. Every explanation felt hollow. He realized he was not a victim. He was not a person of entitlement. He was simply living proof of a system that had nurtured carelessness and blindness for far too long. Captain Dana made a brief announcement over the intercom, her voice steady as steel. "We will maintain cruising altitude for 1 more hour." No one responded, but everyone heard the unspoken meaning beneath it. This flight was no longer about Seattle. It was a journey into full exposure. Phoebe pointed her camera at Jordan again. No zoom, no angle changes. Just documenting a real moment, a man sitting upright and silent, while the entire cabin revolved around him like stars around a gravitational core. A moral gravity. Jordan tilted his head just slightly enough for the light to illuminate half of his face. His eyes opened. No anger, no tremor, no strain. Only calm. The calm of someone who knew that, from this moment forward, the story no longer belonged to Emily, or to Colton, or to the crew. It belonged to the truth. And truth, once released, never returns to the box people tried to trap it in. The plane sliced through a thick layer of white cloud, and every passenger felt the same thing. They were no longer just people sitting on a flight. They were witnesses. And that made the cabin feel much smaller. The plane shook lightly as it entered a thin layer of turbulence, but the sway did not startle anyone. They were all too focused on what was tightening in the air, something heavy like heated metal building layer by layer, now spreading like an invisible field across the cabin. Jordan brushed a fingertip along the edge of the tray table, sensing the vibration of the aircraft, without altering his expression. People who work with surveillance technology often carry a particular kind of calm quiet, deep and solid like well-poured concrete. Jordan was the sharpest version of that calm. In the rows behind, Phoebe had just finished uploading the 3rd video, a short clip she recorded when Hannah placed the bottle of water in front of Jordan with an expression both courageous and heavy. A tiny moment in action, but immense in emotion, a moment of 2 human beings looking at each other and acknowledging truth. And that moment alone was enough to make social media tremble. Comments appeared. "This young flight attendant is what an airline employee should be. Will she lose her job or be promoted for integrity? This is a choice between the system and humanity." Phoebe took a long breath. She realized she was not just recording an incident. She was documenting a picking of sides, something rarely seen so raw. Across the aisle, a young passenger leaned over and whispered, "I think she is the only person on this plane who did the right thing from the start." His friend replied, "Or the only one brave enough to show it." Emily leaned against the metal cabinet in the galley, her eyes turning red, as if the slightest touch would bring tears pouring out. But what hurt her was not fear of being disciplined. It was the truth that the moment she thought she was following procedure was the very moment that exposed every distortion she had ignored. She remembered dozens of previous flights, hundreds of similar situations, when someone was judged by appearance, by clothing, by skin color, by uncertain eyes. And she, in so many of those moments, had chosen silence. But this time, silence had nowhere left to hide. Her phone buzzed. An internal message appeared after landing report to the Port Authority meeting room immediately. She swallowed hard, feeling as if the runway beneath her feet was slanting downward. In the cockpit, Captain Dana watched the glow of the control panel reflect across her face. She was not someone easily shaken, yet she could feel the scale of the situation spreading exponentially, not because Jordan was a CEO, but because Jordan was someone who knew how to be silent in the right way and let the truth speak for itself. She reviewed the system report and said to the first officer, "We will file a full report." "No trimming." The first officer nodded with tightened lips. "I am guessing the airline will try to hide parts of it." Dana looked straight ahead. "Not while I am here." She knew this type of incident damaged more than the airline. It shook the trust of passengers. One misstep by a crew and the entire industry paid the price. Hannah returned to the cabin with a tray of drinks. She tried to keep a professional smile, but her eyes still flicked toward Jordan by instinct, a silent confirmation that she stood on the side of truth. A passenger near the aisle whispered to her, "You did the right thing." Hannah flinched slightly, not expecting to be noticed. The passenger continued, "People forget staff are part of the system too. But you are victims of it as well, aren't you?" Hannah paused for a second, then said simply, "Today I chose not to be silent." Not a declaration, just a fact. Jordan glanced at the cabin through the corner of his eye and noticed the small but unmistakable shift people who at first watched him as if he were an unusual occurrence were now observing him with a different gaze, the gaze of those who could no longer be indifferent. A middle-aged white woman placed a hand softly on her chest and nodded at him. An Asian man looked at him with quiet respect. A group of students whispered among themselves, their voices trembling with anger on his behalf. Jordan showed no reaction. He never let emotion surface early. But that shift, the shift of society inside a sealed airplane cabin, didn't escape him. His phone vibrated. The screen displayed national media requesting identity verification, legal office requesting response. He silenced the notification. Not now. He inhaled deeply and evenly the breath of someone preparing to walk into a meeting room he knew would not just contain chairs and papers, but a system, power, and accountability. Phoebe turned her camera toward the cockpit door. A red light blinked. The signal indicated communication with the ground was active. A message appeared on the cabin display, internal incident under review. A passenger inhaled sharply. "This is serious." Jordan did not turn his head, did not ask, did not react. But his breath deepened slightly. He knew exactly what it meant. The ground was ready. They were waiting for him, not to hear what he would say, but to see what he would do next. What they did not know was that Jordan did not need preparation. He had been prepared long before he stepped onto this plane. And at that moment, as the aircraft sliced through a massive cloud, bright white light flooded through the window across his face, sharp as a blade. A passenger whispered, "He looks like someone about to shake the entire industry." Another replied, "No, he looks like someone who already has." Jordan opened his eyes fully. No more silence. No more waiting. No more enduring. The entire cabin felt one undeniable truth. The storm ahead was not outside. It was in the eyes of the man in seat 1 Alpha. The cabin slipped into a strange quiet as the seatbelt sign lit up again. No one understood why the captain activated it mid-flight, but everyone felt something approaching, not an aircraft emergency, but a kind of preparation for a turbulent landing, a moment that would not end on the runway. A few passengers lifted their heads, glanced around, then looked toward Jordan, as if the answer rested with him. Jordan opened his eyes slowly, his gaze straight calm, yet carrying an undercurrent that was hard to read. With every passing minute, the pieces of the incident were arranging themselves clearly in his mind. The videos, the social media reaction, the internal data, the crew's responses. He knew this aircraft had, in a moment, become the black box of an event millions outside were demanding to see. Phoebe raised her phone, filming Jordan from a distance, but this time she did not post immediately. She recorded deliberately sharply, capturing his breaths, the shifting expressions of passengers around him. She wanted to document not just Jordan's transformation, but the transformation of ordinary people sitting together, witnessing the soft power of truth spreading through a sealed cabin. A young man near the window whispered, "Feels like we're inside a documentary." His friend replied, "No. This is the part documentaries usually tone down because people think it's exaggerated." Up front, Colton Reeves slumped back into his seat, but the retreat only made his discomfort more obvious. He twisted the ring on his finger repeatedly, a reflex of someone scrambling for stability in a rising tide of shame. Every time someone walked past first class, he felt as though they were looking through his skin into the layer of privilege he had never had to justify. For a moment, his eyes collided with Jordan's, only a fraction of a second. But that second sliced into Colton's pride. Jordan did not show disdain. He did not show anger. He simply looked. And that look made Colton feel smaller. Not because Jordan appeared larger, but because Colton realized he had been treated like royalty without ever proving he deserved the throne. In the galley, Emily closed her eyes, her back pressed against the cold metal. Beneath her uniform, sweat gathered along her shoulders and collar. Every ping from a passenger's phone clenched her heart. She heard fragments of whispers drifting from the back cabin. They're going to fire her. Not just fire investigate. Does she even realize what she just did? Emily bit her lip until she tasted blood. She recalled every moment at the boarding gate, the line she spoke as easily as breathing, and that familiarity terrified her. It meant this had become a pattern. Not a mistake. A habit. A habit fed by silence from too many people for too long. Hannah made her way up the aisle with the drink tray. Each step felt heavy, as if carrying the weight of every watcher in the cabin. But when she approached Jordan, she straightened her voice, steady. "Do you need anything?" Jordan shook his head gently, but his eyes returned something to her acknowledgement. And Hannah understood exactly what that look meant. She was choosing the right side, even if that choice meant standing against people she once had to obey. Phoebe filmed the moment, not to shame anyone, but to capture a truth that small acts of integrity in the heart of a storm weigh more than apologies from an entire system. In the back rows, an older woman whispered, "That young attendant is going to change this industry." The person beside her replied, "No." "They're changing it together." Captain Dana activated the intercom, her voice steady and crisp. "We will begin our descent shortly. Please remain seated." But what passengers heard was not a technical announcement. The tone beneath it carried a different meaning. She was preparing to face whatever waited when that aircraft door opened. Jordan looked out the window, sunlight reflecting across his eyes in a long streak. No one knew what he was thinking, but everyone could see one thing clearly: he was not afraid. He was not avoiding anything. Not angry, not anxious. He held only certainty, the certainty of someone who understood that once the plane touched down, the truth was no longer optional. It became obligation. The wheels hit the runway. The aircraft jolted sharply once. The cabin held its breath. No one spoke. No one moved. No one even dared check their phone. They all knew that once the door opened, they were not stepping into an airport. They were stepping into the battlefield where the system and the truth would confront each other. And the person leading that moment was sitting in Seat 1 Alpha. As the plane began to slow, the entire first-class cabin tightened like a pressurized chamber where no one dared breathe too deeply. No one stood up even though the sign had turned off. No one reached for luggage. Everyone seemed to understand that the next moment would not resemble any flight they had ever taken. The entire system was waiting outside, and Jordan, the man sitting upright in 1 Alpha, was the center of every movement about to unfold. Jordan unfastened his seatbelt slowly, each motion feeling like the turning of a page into a new reality. He did not rush. He never needed to. Truth never needed to run. It only needed to arrive. From her row, Phoebe leaned to look through the gap between seats. She saw Jordan stand lifting his small bag with one hand, and she realized the thing that frightened the system was not his technological power, nor his corporate influence. It was his demeanor, calm, controlled, without demand, without display, a form of authority that existed outside the usual framework, collapsing every false standard around it, like a curtain violently pulled open. The aircraft door opened. White light from the jet bridge flooded in, accompanied by a surge of sound, radios crackling, fast footsteps, cameras snapping, airport staff whispering. But what made the entire cabin freeze was the formation waiting outside: airline executives, legal representatives, media staff, 2 FAA inspectors, and a group of reporters whose cameras were already lit. A young passenger gasped softly. "My God, they really are waiting." The person beside him whispered back. "They're not waiting for him. They're waiting for the storm." Jordan stepped onto the jet bridge, walking neither fast nor slow. His presence made people shift aside instinctively. No theatrics, no posture of someone seeking scandal, just a presence too substantial to be ignored. The airport manager stepped forward, her voice stretched tight. "Mr. Miles, thank you for waiting. We have a quick briefing room prepared this way." Jordan looked directly at her eyes, steady and unshaken. "I am not the one who waited," he said slowly. "It's your system that has been waiting for the truth to arrive." A few staff members flinched. Reporters raised their cameras. FAA inspectors took notes. Emily came down minutes later, pale eyes red. When she saw the line of management waiting like an informal tribunal, she felt pierced by 100 invisible needles. But what shook her most was not the officials waiting to question her. It was Hannah's gaze from a few meters away. No anger, no contempt, just a quiet disappointment. Hannah stepped closer to Jordan and said softly, "Thank you for staying calm." Jordan replied, "Calm is a choice when you know you hold the truth." Behind them, Colton Reeves appeared, trying to stand straight. but the moment cameras turned toward him, he shrank. A reporter recognized him and shouted, "Mr. Reeves, did you know the seat you took belonged to someone else?" Colton swallowed hard, searching for an exit. "There was none," he muttered. I was told to sit there." Jordan didn't look at him. He did not need to. Colton's story was exposing itself without Jordan saying a word. Inside the airport meeting room, the glass doors closed, muffling the outside world. Airline representatives, the head of customer service, 2 FAA supervisors, and the public relations team all sat at the table. The air was thick enough to hear each breath. A company executive stood Mr. Miles. "First, we want to offer our Apollo Jordan cut him off. I'm not here to listen to empty apologies. I'm here to see how you handle truth." The room froze. Jordan opened his bag, pulled out a thin laptop, and placed it on the table. The screen lit up, displaying the Tracelog interface timeline, lists, images, cabin, data, staff, identifiers, timestamps, and violation analysis charts. Someone in the room inhaled sharply. They understood immediately that this data could not be denied, edited, or erased. It had already been synchronized to central servers they did not control. Jordan continued, his voice smooth but sharp, like a blade sliding across glass. "I am not asking for privilege. I am asking for standards. What happened today is not a mistake. It is a pattern, and I brought evidence." Silence swallowed the room. Do you want to know the worst part? Jordan looked at each person. Not that the attendant discriminated, but that she believed she was allowed to. One of the FAA inspectors nodded slightly, accepting a verdict that needed no signature. Jordan continued, "I want a new monitoring protocol. A mandatory dual cockpit approval for any seat reassignment, a commitment to retrain your entire crew, and a transparent public report." A trembling executive asked, "You're asking us to?" Jordan replied, "I'm asking you to fix the system you have been operating incorrectly." Outside the meeting room, reporters gathered tightly. Passengers from Flight 317 stood along the hallway, watching through the frosted glass, like witnesses at an informal trial. Jordan closed the laptop, his eyes cold, but not vindictive. "This is not my story," he said. "It is the story of everyone who has ever been dismissed, and today you will look directly at it." No one responded. No one dared. Jordan rose. And when he stepped out the door, the entire hallway fell silent. Not because they feared him, but because they had just seen truth walk on 2 feet. From the perspective of a specialist in systemic ethics, this story reveals that the most dangerous element is not a single person abusing their authority, but a structure that allows them to believe they are entitled to do so. When one calm individual chooses to stand up, the entire system is forced to re-examine itself. If you believe the truth deserves protection, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Respect.